Jack from Massey University, who will be sharing with us on the topic of mastering analytics, how to be a data scientist. Before I hand over the time to our speaker, please note that there is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please feel free to type in your questions at any time during the presentation. Please also note that we will be conducting our feedback poll at the end of the session, so please stay with us throughout. Without further ado, I'll now pass the time to Dr. Teo. Dr. Teo, over to you.
Tammy, thank you very much for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody in Singapore from New Zealand. Good evening from here. And I hope you're all enjoying your lunch break. I have to say, when I think of Singapore and the food, I do miss it a lot. In my previous trips there, it's one of the most things that I enjoy. So I look forward to heading back to Singapore to enjoy the cuisine over there. So here in New Zealand, I should make a couple of announcements or a couple of warnings first. In New Zealand, we're still on lockdown, so we're working from home, and you know the situation and the routine. So the couple of issues that we might experience is my internet has been playing up. So if I disappear, I will be back. So just hang on tight. I will reappear once I reset the router. The second thing is I've got little kids, and it's evening time. There's bath time and dinner time, and so kids are going a little bit crazy in the background, and my wife is doing her best, but she's outnumbered 3-1. So that's the drill. Those are the warnings. But let me dive in and share my screen, and we'll get started. All right, so I'm assuming that you can all see my screen, and you can also see the title of the talk. Now, what is the topic that's really behind this talk is employability. What I really want to talk about is how you can go about in establishing a successful, satisfying career as a data scientist. And what I'm going to focus on in particular in this talk is technology. Now, the reason why I want to focus on technology is because technology and data science are really tightly bound together. And what that means is that your employability, your ability to market yourself to your prospective employers is going to be hugely contingent on what kinds of technologies you are skilled in. So this is something that I want to focus on. And what I want to accentuate is that there are going to be right technologies that are going to get you where you want to be in terms of your career. Second thing is, who is this presentation, this webinar for? Well, I've got two cohorts, two sets of people in mind. Those of you who are looking to upskill, I'm hoping you will get something from this presentation. I hope that what I will do is present like a roadmap for you in terms of what are the technologies that perhaps you have gaps in that you could fill in order to make yourself more employable. The second cohort group of people that I'm thinking of is those who are looking to completely reskill, change the career path into data science analytics. And what I hope to show you in this webinar is what are some of the first steps that you can take. It can be a very daunting area, but if I can actually show you the very first step that you can take, then I'll feel as though that I've achieved something in this talk. All right, so let's have a look at the details of this webinar. First thing we need to set straight is, what does a data scientist actually do? So there are three things, very general terms, that I want to cover in terms of what the contribution of data scientists is to organizations, to businesses as a whole. What I then want to do is I want to break down these three main areas into skill sets. It's important to understand what specifically do data scientists do. And the reason why I want to do that is because I now want to map the technologies to those particular skills that data scientists generally have. And there are lots of technologies out there. And so it's nice to sort of lay them all out and study them and see which ones are in demand and which ones are going to make you more employable and in demand. Now, you shouldn't take everything that I say as a given. So what I'm going to try and do is provide you with evidence as to why I believe that these technologies are in demand and why those technologies are going to place you on the right footing to get to where you want to be. All right, so we'll look at a lot of graphs. So if you want to be in data science and you want to be in analytics, you're going to have to develop a love for graphs, and I'll show a lot of graphs to you today. And the next step is, all right, so once you've learned a few technologies, you've gained a few skills, you know how to do a little bit of data science, how do you actually showcase? How do you demonstrate what you can do to your prospective employers? And degrees are great. Employers are looking for degrees. You've got to have them. But what I'm finding, at least in my experience here, with our industry collaborators, is they're looking for evidence of what a student or graduate can do rather than simply showing degrees and grades. All right, so I'll give you 4 tips in terms of what you can do. And the last thing that I want to focus on is I want to show you some data that I pulled out from last week that shows what are the employers in Singapore looking for in the space of data science and analytics, all right? And if we have time, I'll talk a little bit about where things are heading in terms of technology and trends and so forth. So it doesn't really need to be stated, but data science is a hot topic. And LinkedIn produces, I think it's an annual report on what are some of the emerging jobs in terms of positions and roles. And the one we have here is the latest one, is 2020. 2021 hasn't for some reason come out. But essentially what they said was data science is booming. It is beginning to replace legacy roles. And we've known that, but we've got confirmation from these big players who have a real good sense of what's going on. So where did data scientists rank on their list? They came 3rd. So 3rd out of all the emerging roles that they were looking at. But the interesting thing is the number 1 role was an artificial intelligence specialist. And some of the skills that were listed under this job description were things like machine learning, which is exactly what you do as a data scientist. So you can see that there's a lot of overlap between being an artificial intelligence specialist as well as a data scientist. So you can kind of say that, data scientists are the most emergent and most in demand new roles that are coming about. Now, let's first of all address what data scientists actually do for organizations. Now, there are 3 things. 3 things. First one is data scientists contribute towards increased efficiency for organizations. Now, what's an example of this? The one that always comes to mind to me is Amazon, because they do this so well. Now, Amazon, what they've done is they've managed to save the millions and millions of dollars by optimizing where they send their items. So what they do is, before customers even order certain items, they're able to predict where the demand is going to be geographically around the country, and they send those items to the local distribution centers that are near to demand, and thereby they save millions and millions of dollars by doing that. So that's one example of efficiency. There are many out there. Decision making. What's an example of decision making? The example that comes to mind is JP Morgan. So JP Morgan, they were fined $36 billion for their role in the global financial crisis some 10 years ago or so. Now, what they've implemented is a predictive model that's able to monitor the employees and essentially identify who the rogue investors within the company are, so that they can make a decision to intervene and stop those trades that might be rogue in order to comply with regulations. The third thing is innovation. So data scientists massively contribute in terms of innovation. What's an example of innovation? The one that comes to mind is IBM Watson. And if you haven't heard of IBM Watson, do Google IBM Watson. There's a fantastic documentary on this. Now, IBM Watson was created by IBM, but what it was created for is to play the game of Jeopardy. And what IBM Watson managed to accomplish is it managed to defeat the world's best human player in jeopardy. It was quite a staggering achievement. Now, that's a fairly trivial achievement. I mean, in terms of AI, it's amazing, but in terms of what it contributes to society, it's kind of minimal. But what they've done is they've innovated and they've repurposed Watson in order to provide diagnoses for very difficult medical conditions. And so this is an example of innovation and what data scientists are doing in that area. All right, so those are 3 contributions. Now let's break these contributions up into actual skills that make those things possible. So there are 6 things that I want to put before you. The first thing that data scientists need to have is programming. And the reason why I need to be able to program is because in data science, you need to be pulling data from multiple sources. You need to be interfacing with web APIs, various databases. You need to be pulling data from web scraping and dealing with lots of different file formats. That requires programming. And once you have all the data is never clean. It always comes in a rather messy state. And so you need to clean it up. And we tend to do that programmatically as well. So that's a big skill that we need. The second one is data scientists. What we need is machine learning. You need to be able to conduct reliable experimentation, and you need to be able to understand how those models that you're creating, how they work. You need to be able to open them up, and that requires skill. The third one is perhaps slightly less technical. It's slightly on a softer end of data science, but it's visualization. It's no less important. And businesses and organizations are increasingly relying on dashboarding to give them a sense of where they're sitting, where things are heading. So that's an important thing, important skill to have. The fourth one is IT. It's very, very hard to decouple computer skills from a data scientist. And if you're more sort of at the techie end of being a data scientist, then you might have some of these particular skills, such as being able to productionize or operationalize your model. You might have a little bit of a software engineering skill set in your tool belt. Oftentimes, or increasingly, so you'll be working with large data as well. And so that requires some IT skills. And then there are also productivity and team collaboration tools that you'll need to do. So we'll look at some of those. Not every data scientist, but there is a subset of data scientists who are very, very strong at statistics and maths. And that is really their major contribution to data science teams in an organization. And so that is quite an important skill set. And we'll look at some of the tools that enable people to use them. The sixth one I like to throw in there because data science, yes, it tends to be mostly technical. It is highly technical, but all data scientists, all really, really good data scientists have strong soft skills and communication. The ability to tell a story with the data, a narrative, is extremely important. And so I would say that's the sixth sort of integral part of being a data scientist. So what I'm going to do now is, for each one of these 6 categories, I'm going to map them to technologies that I think are really important that you should consider. And then we'll look at the evidence as to, can I back these things up, these claims that I'm making? All right, so when it comes to programming, this is what I'm recommending. If you want to pursue programming and you're wondering, where do I start? What should I choose? These 3 technologies are a really safe bet: Python, R, and SQL. So what's the evidence for these claims? So I like to refer to TIOBE. If you haven't heard of TIOBE, TIOBE is an organization that tracks popularity of programming languages. Now, the way they do this is quite sophisticated. They look at all the search terms for a given language from Google, from Yahoo, from Bing, all the major search engines. They look at courses that are offered out there for programming. They look at job adverts that are asking for particular skills in certain programming languages, and they pull all this data together, and every single month they update their ranking. Now, this month, something extraordinary has happened, and that is Python has become #1. So we see up the top that Python, for the first time in 20 years, has displaced C and Java, which have constantly been 1 and 2 over the last couple of decades. Now, this is quite extraordinary. SQL that I mentioned to you before, SQL is used mostly for interfacing with databases, is currently sitting on 8, so it's top 10. And the last one that's sitting on top 15 is R. So these languages, at least from the perspective of TIOBE, are in demand. And you're not going to go wrong with choosing any one of those 3. Now, you should never really rely on just one source of information. But how about we look at, we'll look at the second one a little bit later on. But let's look at the rise of Python. Let's first of all look at the rise of Python. So since 2017, you can see very, very fast, rapid rise. What was curious is around 2020, the first half of 2020, there was a sudden jump in popularity, and I was kind of wondering whether or not this was happening due to worldwide lockdowns, people being at home, and people choosing to upskill and learn a new skills. So maybe this is what was happening in early 2020. In terms of R, what we see is kind of similar pattern. There was a lot of interest in early part of 2020, but then there's been a fairly rapid drop-off as well. Now, I mentioned to you that it's always worthwhile looking at a second source. And the source that I want to refer to now is O'Reilly. So O'Reilly is a publishing house. They've been around for several decades. And what they do is they publish technical books on programming languages and such things. But not only that, in the last few years, they've branched out to online learning platforms as well. And so they're able to gather a lot of information in terms of what are people after, what are people learning. And so what we see in their 2021 report published earlier this year is that Python is up the top. Its usage growth is strong. It's head and shoulders above Java and C++, but these other languages are not even used in the space of data science anyway. So Python is really your go-to language, I would say, in terms of beginning your journey with data science. So that's on the side of programming. What about machine learning? So for machine learning, I've got 4 technologies that are good options that I want to share with you. There's scikit-learn and there's PyTorch, and these 2 technologies, they're libraries. They play very, very nicely with Python. They are essentially Python tools. We have TensorFlow, which does also work with Python, but it's able to work with other programming languages too. And then we have a commercial tool, SAS, which is able to do pretty much everything as well. So those are the options that I would suggest. And I'll come back to in terms of what I would recommend your first step would be if you are reskilling or upskilling. But let's have a look at what O'Reilly is showing in terms of what's popular from their perspective. And what we see is TensorFlow is right up the top. It's actually the top tool because machine learning is just a term. It's not actually a technology per se. So the #1 tool is TensorFlow. The second one is scikit-learn, and PyTorch further down, but it is growing rather rapidly. So what does Google Trends have to say about those 4 tools? So what I've done here is I've pulled data from Google Trends in terms of Google term searches for SAS, for scikit-learn, TensorFlow, and PyTorch. And this is what we see. This is going back 5 years. All right, so 5 years ago, the picture was quite different to what it is right now. We see that SAS was really the preeminent tool in terms of searches anyway, but others have grown over the last 5 years. Certainly TensorFlow has grown very, very rapidly, but they've all kind of converged over the last year or so. All right, so they're all fairly even in terms of demand, if this does represent demand. And the question mark is, where are things likely to head from this point on? It's hard to see how this picture is going to change too dramatically. It's also hard to see how a new player is going to come onto the block and displace these 4. So I would say that these 4 are really a safe bet in terms of what the evidence, what the data is showing. The third skill is visualization. So what are some of the technologies that I would consider in upskilling if I wanted to go down this path? So I've got 2 for you. I've got Power BI and I've got Tableau. So I'll start off with Tableau first. So Tableau has been around for 20 years. So it's very established. It's a very, very mature technology. And just in the last 2 years, it's been acquired by Salesforce. And so it's got a very strong parent, somebody who's got a lot of money, a lot of backing in order to make Tableau a success. The other one is Power BI. So Power BI is different. It's a fairly new player on the block. It's been around only since 2015. It's owned by Microsoft. And because it is owned by Microsoft, has been able to grow in terms of its market share quite rapidly, and it's likely to continue growing even further. So you can see here on Google Trends how in the last 5 years, Power BI has grown steadily, and no doubt it will continue to do so. When you go to Google Trends, you can run these queries yourself, and it's worthwhile seeing where particular technologies might be in more demand, because the picture does actually change from one region to the next. So depending on where you want to establish your career, it might be worthwhile finding where these particular technologies are more searched for in terms of regions. So for Singapore, it looks like Power BI is probably going to be more popular, but it tends to be fairly close. All right, so that's visualization technologies. What about IT skills? So I've got 4 listed here. And some of these are advanced. Hadoop is fairly advanced. So if you're somebody who's looking to reskill somebody who already has strong skills in Python, R, or SQL, and somebody who's already capable in machine learning, then Hadoop is a good one to consider. Git is a really important one when you move into a data science role where you work with teams and you have projects that you're collaborating on. Git is a source code management system, and everybody does need to know that when you work in a team setting. Jupyter Notebooks, that is a given technology once you start working with Python. But the one I want to focus on is cloud technologies, because this is the one that's exploding. This is the one that's becoming quite a big deal. So let's have a look and see who the big players are. I'm sure you've heard of AWS, Amazon's cloud-based service. It's been the biggest player on the market and still is, with 32% market share as of the first quarter of this year. But Azure, which is Microsoft's cloud-based service, it's been growing fairly rapidly, and they're aggressively trying to retake some of the market share from AWS. But Google Cloud is also growing slowly, steadily. But my choice would be, if you were to go with, if you wanted to upskill in cloud-based technologies, I would pick AWS. Now, in terms of statistics and maths, the nice thing is the two technologies that I mentioned before can pretty much do everything that you need in stats and maths. There's a third one here that I mentioned, MATLAB, which is very, very popular, particularly if you come from the engineering background. But let's have a look at Google Trends to see how those technologies match up against each other in terms of popularity. And so this is what we see. Python clearly leads the way, but we see R is edging out MATLAB, and I've got Wolfram's Mathematica in there as well because it tends to be a popular tool amongst some of the mathematicians. But as you can see, it is a much, much smaller player in the market than MATLAB and the others. All right, so that's statistics and maths. And the last one that I want to cover very briefly are soft skills and attributes. And the one that I want to focus on in particular is agile development methodology. Now, this is not strictly a technology per se, because it's a development methodology. It's a management methodology usually used in software engineering teams, but it's one that's still sought after. So familiarity with this, as we will see in one of the graphs that I'll show you later on, for what the Singaporean employers are looking for, it is definitely a skill set, a particular kind of a soft technology that's worthwhile gaining some familiarity with. All right. So let's say you've taken some first steps and you've learned how to do a little bit of Python programming or maybe R. You've tackled some projects. How do you showcase? How do you demonstrate to your prospective employer that you can do the things that they need done for their work? So the first thing that I tell my students here in New Zealand in terms of what they should do is get an account with Kaggle. So what is Kaggle? Kaggle is a cloud-based data science platform that essentially enables you to develop data science solutions, take part in data science machine learning competitions, and learn. They've got a lot of courses there as well. So the wonderful thing about Kaggle is this is an example of yesterday's competitions that were displayed. So you can join an active competition, a competition that actually can win you a lot of money. There are other competitions that are categorized more as playground, where you just learn and hone in your skills as a data scientist. But as you can see, these are some really interesting and broad problems that you can learn to tackle. So we've got sports prediction, we've got health topics here. We have a little bit of natural language processing here as well, in terms of machine translation, it seems. So get stuck in some of these competitions. Now, what happens is when you take part in these competitions, you submit your solution and then you get ranked. Now, the important thing is you don't need to win these competitions. What is important is that you start building a portfolio and that you're able to demonstrate to your prospective employer that you're interested in data science, that you actually spend your own free time in upskilling and honing your craft as a data scientist. It's not really important to get very high on these ladders, but demonstrate your portfolio, demonstrate what you can do and that you're interested in learning, you're curious. The second technology, or the second suggestion that I have for you in terms of showcasing your skills, is to create an account with GitHub. So GitHub is another cloud-based technology which enables you to upload and version control your source code. And so by creating your own account, you're able to upload your projects, your data science projects, even the work that you do on Kaggle to GitHub and make them publicly available. And when you write your CV, you can link to your GitHub account so that your employers can actually look to see what can you actually do, because that counts a lot. You need to stand out amongst others. So GitHub is huge. I mean, I have an account with it. There are 65 million developers on it currently. It's a massive, massive cloud-based service. The third tip that I would have for you is to get involved with Stack Overflow. Now, if you haven't heard what Stack Overflow is, it's a question and answer based service. If you have done any programming, you will learn that you can't do anything without Stack Overflow. I do a lot of programming, and I have to say I have Stack Overflow open in one window next to me all the time, because there are always issues you come across. There are always syntax problems that you need resolved. So where do you turn to? Well, most of the answers you'll find are going to be on Stack Overflow. And so what you can do is you can create an account with Stack Overflow. And once you gain a little bit of confidence, a little bit of familiarity with the tools that you're learning, start contributing with offering some solutions and some answers to people who have questions and problems. All right, so this is hugely valuable. This is something that employers will put some value into. The fourth thing that I would recommend that you do once you've embarked on this journey of data science and gaining some mastery with these skills is start blogging. Once you start tackling some projects of your own interest, once you start learning some new tools even, maybe you want to explain to others, give them tutorials on how to accomplish some task. Well, what I would recommend that you do is turn to Medium, and a particular subset of Medium, which is just a blogging website, towards data science, and start writing about your experiences. And this is a really good way to showcase your capabilities. All right, so we're going to come to a part where I'm going to share with you, as I said in the intro, the latest data that I've managed to pull in about what the Singaporean data science, data analytics market is looking for. So the way I went about in gathering this data is I turned to the My Careers Future website. And what I've done for my reading is that this particular website is a requirement for a lot of jobs to be advertised on. So I think that there's a category of jobs within Singapore that has to be advertised on My Careers Future. So my understanding is that this is quite a comprehensive resource in terms of what are some of the going jobs. So what I did was I essentially wrote a script. And what the script does is it inputs. Here we see data scientist, but it essentially inputs all of these particular terms programmatically. It automates this process into this search box. And I essentially scrape and I pull all this data in, and then I process. Then I process the natural language that's found in each one of the adverts. So what we have in terms of some of the categories, we have role responsibilities and we have qualifications that might be required. But what I'm essentially trying to pull from all these adverts are keywords such as particular tools. Here we might see R, SQL, Python, programming, machine learning. What I'm going to do is pull all these terms in and count how many times do these particular terms and technologies occur. And I'm going to use that as a proxy in order to be able to communicate or make a case that these are the things that employers are looking for, and these are the things that you should consider upskilling in. So this is the result. Now, this is the result of about 2,700 adverts that I managed to pull in and process. And what do we see? It's no surprise that we see machine learning as the most popular term, the most required skill set amongst all the search results that I managed to pull in. Programming, highly sought after. Now, in terms of programming, what are the particular tools and languages that are being sought after? Well, what we see here is Python is the #1 tool from what I can see. SQL #2. In terms of R is down here. I've called it R language. What we also see is big data processing, very, very hot, very much in demand. But I'm also pleased to see that visualizations, sort of top 5, top 6 in terms of what's being sought after. Now, if we look at visualization, we'll see that dashboards are here. And in terms of technology, we see that Tableau is quite a bit more popular at the moment than Power BI in Singapore. All right, so Tableau seems to be what the Singaporean employers are looking for more. In terms of cloud-based technology, what we see is AWS is first, but we see Azure is a little bit behind here as well. Remember how I mentioned to you that in terms of some of the soft skills that you need to have, agile methodologies is something you need to consider adding to your toolkit. Well, here's agile. It's very, very much in demand. Some of the other things that I mentioned, Git, the ability to use the technology for source code versioning. We see SAS here as well. And these are some of the machine learning libraries that I talked about before, as well as Kaggle, and being able to do what I just did in order to pull this data in, web scraping. All right, so that's this is hot off the press. This is essentially a snapshot of what is happening right now in Singapore and what is being sought after. The second graph that I want to show you is something we're all interested in. How much are you going to get paid for different roles in data science? And so I've managed to pull from these job adverts weekly compensation packages associated with each one of these roles. So what we see here is in these boxes, essentially the distribution, the spread of weekly packages, salary packages. What we see in a bar here is the median, right? So we see the medians through here. Senior data scientist seems to be paid the most, although it's fairly close. You can argue with data architect, but there's a lot more spread there. Data scientist, not far behind. What I managed to pick up in my searches, and I think it's to do with the fact that my search was very, very broad, I've managed to pick up a few titles that you might think, oh, well, this is not a data scientist. I've got a marketing executive here, another digital marketing executive. But what they must have had in their job descriptions is something to do with data analytics, which is why their roles were picked up. But anyway, we've got some of these slightly different roles being picked up. But it's nice to see them being contrasted to all the others. Anyway, I've got a marketing manager here as well. Okay, so that's the snapshot of what's currently happening in Singapore. And I am going to probably run out of time soon. So I might come back to this particular slide and let me just skip onto here. So what can you do right now in order to get started with data science? If you're anything like me, you're probably going to struggle to go to the library, pick up some thick textbook on Python programming and start working through it. It's probably likely that your motivation levels are going to drop down to 0 after day 2. That's not how I like to learn, and in my experience, that's not how a lot of people these days prefer to learn as well. So here's my suggestion. Make it a hobby. Find a data set on a topic that you really, really like, that you're really interested in, that you want to study. And then you'll have a reason to learn this particular tool. So for example, I like tennis. I used to play a lot of tennis. And so one of my hobbies, one of the things that I do on the side is I've managed to pull down a data set on all the tennis matches in the last 20 years. So I've got this really large data set, thousands and thousands of match results, who played who, what the scores were, what surface they were played on, and so forth. And I play with this data set, trying to build machine learning models to try and predict who's going to win. Do the same. Find something that you're interested in, and then go and look for a data set on that particular topic that you like. And then try and learn Python or R or SAS in order to solve a problem within this data set. That's the best way to learn. And that's the best way to make yourself stick to this. Another thing that's going to give you a helping hand as you start doing this is there are plenty of online tutorials. I don't need to probably introduce Coursera and Udemy and edX. They've got lots and lots of resources. But my suggestion would be that you kind of do them hand in hand with a data set that's going to be your hobby project. All right, do them hand in hand, because I can tell you, and I'm not exaggerating, that there are probably 24 courses over the last 10 years that I've enrolled in, both in Coursera and Udemy. And I can tell you that there's only one that I've completed. So I start off with these free online courses with great intentions, but I struggle to see them through. So the thing is, if you can combine these courses with a hobby data set, a hobby problem that you love, the chances of you sticking with these courses are going to be much, much higher. Third thing is go to meetups. Find a group of like-minded people, as well as those who can mentor you and point you in the right direction, perhaps serve to open more doors and opportunities for you. So that in Singapore, you're going to have lots of meetup groups for data science, data analytics. Get connected, get connected. And that way you'll also stay inspired. The other thing you can do is do consider paying a small fee sometimes for these small nano courses, micro credentials. I find that if a course is free, there is more incentive to not finish it. But if you are paying some small amount, then you're more likely to actually go through it and go through to the end. So do consider that. Otherwise, also, and this is the sales pitch that I'm going to make, is look for a degree that's really structured, that's going to expose you to all the tools, all the skills that you need, and will provide that structure and timeline that will keep you ticking along from start right through to finish. And this is where, I would introduce Massey's Master Analytics, which is the degree that I sort of oversee and I teach into. Now, what are some of the advantages of doing a full-blown qualification like this with us through PSB? Well, the nice thing is we've got 2 intakes. So you can start in January is the next time you can begin. We cater to students who are both full-time, who have the ability to fully devote themselves to study, but we also have probably an increasing number of students who are part-time students who are currently working, juggling family and other commitments. And you can do this degree over a 24-month period as well. So we're very well accustomed to looking after part-time students. One of the nice attributes, I think, of this degree is the fact that we've got an applied analytics project. And this we often refer to as a capstone project. So once you've done all the taught courses, once you've done the specialization courses that I'll mention in a minute, what we tend to try and do is deploy our students to tackle some real world problem, if we can, in conjunction with an industry partner. And this provides incredible opportunities, but also amazing experience as well. And it adds employability to you because employers are looking for some sort of experience. And this gives our students quite a lot of experience. The other thing to keep in mind is within this degree, Master of Analytics, we have 2 tracks, 2 areas where you can focus. One is marketing and the other one is finance. All right, so you've got a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of choice there as well. And obviously, Massey University is very credible. The College of Science, College of Business ranks quite highly in terms of world rankings. And in terms of technologies, pretty much most of the technologies that I mentioned here, not all of them, but the key ones, the main ones, we cover in this course. And so part of my job description is to ensure that this degree is fit for purpose, it's relevant, and that means that I have to make sure that the technologies that we teach are relevant, are the ones that are in demand in terms of what the business wants. So, in summary, there are 2 things I'd like you to walk away with. The first one is going to be the case that I made in this webinar is that there is such a thing as a right technology. And having that right technology in your tool belt hugely matters. It affects your employability, your marketability, and your ability to get to that place where you want to be in terms of your career. The second point that I want you to walk away with is that you need to be able to showcase your capabilities. It's not enough just to have a degree, a piece of paper that says you've done a Master of Analytics with Massey University. It's not enough. You need to be able to show not just what you can do, but you need to be able to demonstrate that you are curious, that you love this field, that you are willing to invest your own time in upskilling. That's what employers want to see. So those are the 2 key things that I want you to sort of take away from this talk. But in terms of, okay, what are the first steps that you can take right now? If you are somebody that's looking to reskill, so you're somebody who's doing something completely different and wants to make a change towards data science, the least intimidating, the least threatening first step, I would say, is to start working with dashboarding. And my suggestion to you would be to start working with Power BI, because this will give you some exposure in terms of working with data, figuring out what kinds of data types are there, how you can visualize data, how you can see trends and then make interpretations. And that will then set you up for going on to some more advanced steps, such as learning to script or learning to program. And it's this next step is what I would advise those who are looking to upskill to do. So if you've been working as a business intelligence or data analyst, where you've been doing a lot of dashboarding, you've been doing a lot of sort of ad hoc work with data science, but not something that's really technical in terms of programming, this would be my suggestion to you. Your next step is learn to script. And do that, as I said before, by applying it on some project that is a hobby for you. And once you picked up a few skills in terms of Python, then learn some basic machine learning. And I would suggest that you use scikit-learn. Now, even though scikit-learn is not the most popular, it's not the most in-demand skill out there by the employers, it's nonetheless a really good starting point for learning how to do machine learning. All right, some of those other libraries that I talk with, they're advanced. Consider them later. But for now, scikit-learn would be your, or should be, in my opinion, your first step. And in parallel, as you're learning these things, get stuck into Kaggle and take some of your work and put it up to GitHub. So those are my suggestions and recommendations to you guys. And with that, I will close. Thank you for tuning in. And with that, I will look at some of the questions you guys have been posting and see if I can answer them. So let me just stop sharing. Okay. Just bear with me as I work through this. So what do you think about blogging your projects? Yeah, Gabriel, absolutely. As I mentioned, go for it. Do as many projects as you have time and stick them up on GitHub and advertise them. Link them to your LinkedIn account and certainly put them on your CV as links. Totally. So Minkai, does DataCamp certification on Python SQL stand any weight when it comes to getting a role in data science? Absolutely. Any evidence of steps that you've taken to upskill in these particular technologies is going to have some weight. But I would say that what is going to have more weight is what I've been kind of emphasizing, and that is your willingness and your ability to tackle projects and to put them up on GitHub as well as on Medium as blogs. So by all means, do that. Okay, so Eddie, I have a question from you. What's the major difference between data scientist and data analyst? How important is Microsoft Excel compared to programming skill inside the life of data scientist? It's a good question, very good question. So the way I view the data analytics space is it's a spectrum. On one end, we have the highly technical, which I would say are the data scientists. These are the people that can program, sometimes operationalize the models. They're very tech savvy. And then on the other hand, we have the data analysts, which are a little bit on a softer end of things. They don't necessarily have the skill set of being able to do machine learning, forecasting, data mining, and those kinds of things. So that's kind of the spectrum. Probably on the furthest end of the spectrum, I would put business intelligence, which is where sort of dashboarding fits in. To your question about Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Excel is valuable. It is used still, I would say, to some degree within the BI space, business intelligence space, data analysts. But when it comes to data scientists, it hasn't got much of a footing there. So I wouldn't recommend necessarily, if you're going to spend time, and we're all time poor, and you have to be very judicious in terms of where do you focus your time in terms of what do you upskill in. I would say don't choose Microsoft Excel, choose one of the other technologies instead. That's just my opinion. Now, Kenneth, do I have any resources to share for meetups? I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what the state of meetups is in Singapore. I know that we have a particular meetup group that we run in New Zealand for our Master Analytics students. But they're pretty easy to find. So I imagine if you just search for meetups, data science, Singapore, lots of options will pop up. Okay, so Hazel Ho, you want to start on your journey with zero experience. That can be daunting. And where do you start? So I fully take my hat off to you because it can be really bewildering. And to some degree, I probably haven't helped today because I've shown you so many technologies. But in my last slide, I hope I've given you a little bit of a clue, and a little bit of hope in terms of where to start. And where to start would be simple dashboarding. I wouldn't necessarily say start off with programming because that can be quite intimidating. I would suggest that you start with, look at Power BI. You can get free trial versions of it and start working with simple dashboarding. Just get familiar with data. And once you start developing a little bit of confidence, then look to branch out into a little bit of programming. And that should be a good start. But also go to Meetup and get some people around you who are going to cheer you on, because you'll need encouragement. Ashok, will you advise a 40+ mechanical engineer to switch to data science? Absolutely. Look, it's never too late. It's absolutely never too late. I just finished supervising a student who was doing his capstone project as part of his Master Analytics here in New Zealand. And he would be late 40s, probably 50. I've got another student who's just started a capstone project. She would be early 50s. Let me see if I've got anybody else in that age group. Yeah, those would be the two older students. Now, they've got a fantastic career prospect ahead of them. And so I would encourage you. I wouldn't necessarily, I don't know your circumstances, but consider doing part-time reskilling. See if you can continue your work if that is what you want to do, continue being a mechanical engineer, and see if you can begin to slowly reskill part-time. Try it, see if you like it. And if you don't, well, you can still stay with your career as a mechanical engineer. It's never too late. Okay, Ray, good question. What level of math stats knowledge is required for data scientists? So I find it quite encouraging that you don't have to be a maths and statistical genius to be a data scientist, because I'm not one. I am not utterly brilliant in maths or stats. I'm a computer scientist by training. So my strength is the techie side. So the wonderful thing about data scientists is you don't have to be brilliant in all those areas that I've shown you, because as a data scientist, you tend to work in teams. And in teams, everybody's going to have different sets of strengths and weaknesses. And where you are weak, somebody else is going to fill in those gaps with their strengths. So sure, you need to have some basic idea of maths, statistics, but you don't need to be a whiz, and you don't need to be intimidated by that as well, because you can always find somebody else who you're working with that can fill in those gaps that you might have. Mohammed, is there a difference between a master's degree and master analytics? It's the same thing. So a master of analytics is a master's degree. Just keep track of time. All right, I think I'm supposed to be closing off shortly. So I apologize that I haven't been able to answer all of the questions that are there. I know there are lots more. So please, you've seen my contact details. If you would like to contact me, feel more than welcome to do that, and I can address those questions. But for now, I believe I'm supposed to hand over back to Tammy.
Thank you, Dr. Teo, for your time and more importantly, for inspiring us with your valuable sharing. We
Yes.
hope you've enjoyed today's session and will now invite you to participate in our feedback poll. Please give us your honest feedback so that we can further improve on our brown bag series. The feedback poll should be popping up on your screen, so please take a few moments to share with us your observations. Your feedback is important to us, so we appreciate you taking time to do this. Thank you for your feedback and for joining us today. This brown bag session is proudly brought to you by Headhunt in partnership with Massey University. Please join us at our next session on the 5th of November on the topic of Identifying Your Leadership Style by PSB Academy. Please sign up early on our website, masterclass.sg. With that, we will end today's session. Goodbye. See you soon.